Listen, it's quite easy to assume that most of every horror game you're gonna find nowadays is at least in some part inspired by the works of H.P. Lovecraft or Junji Ito. I mean, one of them is a celebrity maniac from the 1920s that wrote The Call of Cthulhu, and the other is arguably the most prolific and accomplished horror illustrator of the 21st century. You wouldn't assume a full-time racist mentally ill man from Rhode Island with a part-time hobby of writing down his incomprehensible ramblings and a mangaka with the energy of a nice old lady would have much in common, and yet they're both regarded as masters of cosmic horror writing. That sense of dread and despair you get from trying to understand the unknown, trying to comprehend things much greater than you, things that would make you spiral into madness. Lovecraft might have pioneered it, but Ito's manga, at least to me, perfects it. While Lovecraft's writings are simultaneously deeply evocative and disconcertingly undescriptive of the horrors they present, Junji Ito's short stories are distinctively elevated by his art style. Sure, the whole idea of cosmic horror is that it is wildly confusing and incommunicable, but I think the panels of any Ito manga carry with them a sense of unease pretty comparable to Lovecraft.
It was revealed to me in a dream.
Mass yapping. The attention to grotesque detail distorts his art into imagery that is uncomfortable to look at, and yet you'll be left analyzing it in an attempt to decipher just what the hell you are even looking at.
Check it out. Ah! Whoa, what's the matter? What the hell is that?
Visceral, twisted bodies undergoing metamorphosis, turning them into something no longer human. The storytelling in Ito's mangas leave you in the dark completely. You watch as bizarre events occur and warp these little self-contained worlds without even being told how or why it is happening. And that very much keeps in line with the idea of the unknowable horrors of the universe toying with the mortal world, like an 8-year-old giving his Lego figures the most absurd lore. It's unsurprising that a lot of game devs would jump on the man-made horrors beyond your comprehension bandwagon. In fact, it's so unsurprising that I would be more shocked if a horror game wasn't at least somewhat inspired by Lovecraft or Ito's works. Like, come on, where's my Edgar Allan Poe inspired game? Okay, never mind, I take it back. What the fuck is that? What was this video about again? World of Horror is the type of game you get by throwing multiple of my favorite things into a blender. A horror RPG heavily inspired by old school 80s adventure games with roguelike elements, all bundled into the surreal premise of an independent paranormal investigator attempting to prevent the coming Armageddon to be caused by the reawakening of an old god. That was a mouthful. Developed by
Paweł Koźmiński,
better known as Panstev, a Polish part-time game dev and dentist, World of Horror is an unapologetic love letter to cosmic horror. And goddamn if it isn't a great
This right
one.
here is my favorite thing.
The visuals, all done in MS Paint, emulate Junji Ito's illustrations while still keeping their own flair. One small thing I really appreciate about this game is the way it takes advantage of the one-bit aesthetic in order to give you tons of customizability over how exactly each of your runs look. As a roguelike, you'll be restarting a lot, so being given the option to look at something slightly different each time keeps it fresh. You can go from this very subdued look that kinda reminds you of something you'd see on a Game Boy, or bump the game's graphics up to 2 bits for a two-tone style. Or if you're a lunatic with burnt retinas, you can just keep the game's devote. Hey, change that back now, fuck. Now, the reason I chose to talk about how the game looks first before even talking about the game itself is because if you're a bit like me, your reaction upon booting into your first run will kinda go like this. What the fuck? Oh, there's so much. What am I looking at? Alright, slow down. For an initial playthrough, all of this is a lot to take in. I mean, shit, there's so many different segmented menus and words. The most terrifying part of this game might just be having to keep track of all of this. So, before we go any further, let's get this cleared up. This here is your main play area, displaying everything you can interact with, events and battles. Right below it is a text log for all the actions performed by you as well as enemies. This displays your player character, your stamina, your HP, and reason, your sanity meter essentially, as well as your character's stats, which will determine what you can and can't do during certain events. Above that are various different inventories displayed depending on which menu you're currently looking at. This displays everything from your current items, spells, whatever injuries or curses you're inflicted with, party members, and so on. If anything, World of Horror's gameplay tends to lean heavy into resource management and keeping track of exactly how badly the eldritch horrors you've been blasted with have fucked you up.
How many cigarettes have you got on?
Finally, at the very top of the screen displays how many bullets and nicotine cancer sticks you're lugging around, as well as a doom meter. You see, every run of this game is a ticking time bomb. Every action you take, from just walking around Shiokawa to having a scrap of your sleep paralysis demon, hasten the reawakening process of the old god which will sneeze and accidentally wipe out humanity as a whole after it's back from nap time. Your most precious resource is time, because anything you do will, much like in a court trial, be used against you. World of Horror's story takes place in 1980X in the small Japanese town of Shirokawa, wherein you are planning to uncover the secret behind mysterious going-ons within your hometown, and ultimately stop a cataclysmic event from occurring. Now, I say story very lightly because the game doesn't really have a full-fledged overarching narrative, and I mean, it doesn't have to, because where it shines is the multiple cases you have to solve as your main objective. They embody the influence of horror manga short stories perfectly, making for some very interesting experiences. For example, one mystery might find you attending a vigil preceding your granduncle's funeral, only for it to spiral into an eerie supernatural event because you chose to ignore the pamphlet very clearly listing the routine for the night. You find that your granduncle's body is missing and all the guests have either disappeared or acting strangely. So, now you have to fight for your life against demonic entities, which used to be guests in attendance, before finding out the whole event was a hallucination, part of some old man's plan to cheat death, which you are now accomplice to as you've sacrificed one of the remaining guests to escape the strange illusion. Another mystery has you on a mission to uncover the whereabouts of a teacher who disappeared after attempting to perform magic.
Magic.
This then leads you to ask around among pupils of the missing teacher, all of which are experiencing paranormal outlandish occurrences since the disappearance. Exploring the school, chanting and drums become more and more audible from the corridors as you walk by. You eventually stumble upon the bloated corpse of a teacher nailed onto a chalkboard, and before you get any time to examine it, a student bursts out and attacks you covered in the man's entrails. Once you successfully fight your way out of the encounter and proceed, the noise gets louder. Before you know it, you're forced into an encounter where your enemy is the whole fucking school building. So, after some attempts to will the school into non-existence and property damage, you watch as the lunatic cultist teacher is devoured by the monster she was trying to summon. All's well that ends well, I guess. A majority of the mysteries you're presented with do take a satisfying Lovecraftian turn, revealing some unspeakable terror-inducing being as the cause of the whole mess. And that's clearly the point. But some of the roots do things differently, instead tackling more believable horrors. Things that, with very little suspension of disbelief, you could imagine actually happening in real life in some way or another. Like this mystery wherein you begin getting suspicious of a new ramen shop in town which has everyone lining up for hours just to have a taste. After going in to order some for yourself, you do the most reasonable thing and go fucking dumpster diving and find a piece of smelly meat. So you somehow manage to get them tested in the lab, and once the results come back, you're repulsed to find out whatever was being put in that ramen was far from FDA approved, pulsating and reacting to human blood as if alive. And I mean, sure, I don't think you'll be getting some kind of meaty flesh bud put into your food anytime soon.
But this scenario does sound like some export story about some flesh-eating food or something, you know?
Your school being a hotbed for occult summonings of Nyarlathotep might not hit close to home, but the fear that you may one day get human meat instead of your Big Mac is very real. I mean, the way McDonald's kitchens act up, yeah, you never know. Overall, these mysteries, as your main objective, are solid, self-contained adventures with varying levels of satisfying outcomes. But that's about where my praise ends of these main objectives. While they may be aesthetically presented as some Twin Peaks-esque investigation of a small town case, there is very little player input into these events other than choices you make which may change the outcome of them. I would enjoy these a lot more if these mysteries were developed further and involved you actually having to decipher bizarre occurrences like puzzles and uncovering leads. As it stands right now, these main objectives are nothing but a few pieces of text describing the mystery and the game sending on a wild goose chase in specific areas of Shirokawa. This makes them feel a lot more like a side piece to the roguelike random encounters you experience while looking in those areas, rather than their own full-fledged side stories.
All in all, the mysteries kind of just exist for the sake of progression. They are, after all, the only way to get the 5 keys you need to enter the lighthouse, which is the game's final area to get through in order to successfully complete a run. This doesn't make them bad, they're all generally pretty well written, if a bit generic at times. While they do sometimes include fights and random events specific to the mysteries you're currently investigating, they're generally quite limited in scope. But that's what the random non-mystery specific encounters are for. while alarming account of abnormal arms will simply tell you to investigate downtown, what will happen is completely left up to RNG. You might get jumped by a rotting corpse covered in poison ivy, or go to the museum to learn the date of the old god's arrival, maybe while on your way through the rooms of a mansion, or you're suddenly sent into a completely different realm. From what I can tell, there's a whole lot of different things that can happen while you're out exploring in any part of Shiokawa. There's also encounters tied to particular criteria, such as the Out of Funds event, which only takes place if the player is broke. This salesman will then promptly come up to you and ask you for either a fraction of your blood, sanity, or peace of mind in exchange for some money. Truly the wonders of capitalism. This lovely chap is not to be confused with the dream salesman enemy, however, which can be encountered anytime you're frolicking through the woods like an idiot. Being attacked by this monstrosity will eat away at your reason, much like any moment spent on the phone with the customer service from... Speaking of being attacked, the battle system is quite simple, actually. During an enemy encounter, any action you perform is done through your combat sequence. This bar over here that basically tells you how many things you can do per turn. This is measured through the time needed for your character to perform this action. But that doesn't really matter, because you're just kind of counting to 200. You can kick, normal or strong attack with a weapon, or not fight at all. There's defensive actions, like preparing yourself for the next hit you're going to take, or guarding against it completely. Then there's some other special action, looking around for an improvised weapon, which takes an ungodly amount of time, inspecting your enemy, conjuring up more stamina at the cost of losing your brain cells, or vice versa, and clapping and bowing. Look, I don't know, apparently there's some type of ritual you can perform if you get the correct number of claps and bows in, but every time I've tried, I just get stared at like I'm some fucking buffoon before promptly being eradicated from existence. Regardless, when I say the combat is simple, I mean it. You can disregard like half the list of moves I've just given you, and instead go for the all-reliable pummeling the shit out of whatever is in front of you until it works. If I can destroy an entire fucking school building by throwing a few bottles at it, what's gonna stop me from taking that same approach against some ghoul? Seriously though, a combination of dodging and attacking normally will get you through like every fight in this game with no problem. You're more likely to die from choosing the wrong options during other random events, or simply just getting incredibly unlucky. There is technically one last combat mechanic at your disposal, but I'm not sure if actually calling it a combat mechanic necessarily would be correct, because they're usable outside of battle too. I'm talking about spells. They can do a whole bunch of shit, ranging from regeneration, your basic ass fireball attack, and some of the more interesting spells, such as Expel Evil, which for the small price of an awful throwing up experience will decrease your doom meter by 6%. This is an insanely good panic button for whenever the inevitable is approaching and you still haven't gotten all your keys. Or take Book of Gore for another example. It's a healing spell giving you a +3 to both your reason and stamina at the expense of inflicting a minor or major injury every time it is cast. High risk of debilitating yourself for the rest of the run in exchange for the high reward of regenning both your most vital stats. So you'd expect to use it cautiously, right? Well, yeah. Probably, unless you're me in this run where I was getting absolutely shagged by anything and everything, with my luck being astronomically low. This resulted in my character not looking too hot and getting worse by each encounter. Luckily for me, I just so happened to have the spell, which does not require anything to cast other than causing an injury. So naturally, I cast it several times in order to get my stamina and reason up to a decent enough number, and essentially turn myself into a Frankenstein's monster reanimated corpse for the rest of the run. Was that the smartest use of the spell? No. Was it fun? Yes. Did it cost me the run in the end? Also yes, but that's besides the point. Look, all I'm saying is that there's a lot of different ways in which you can use these spells to help you. It may not be enough to save you from dying or maxing out your doom meter, but what's a roguelike without the constant ups and downs and non-zero chance that you will die? There's a lot of content in World of Horror, much of it being things that I think are better experienced for yourself, so I'm not going to go through any more detail of any of the remaining, what feels like hundreds of different things that could happen to you in a run. Hell, the game allows you to pretty much fully customize everything about your run, from the character you're playing to the town itself and even the old god you're trying to stop. There's a few of these gods. I actually couldn't give you the exact number, as some of them are unlockable through achievements that I haven't gotten, but they all affect your playthrough in a unique way. Once you finally solve every mystery laid out before you and unlock the lighthouse, your run hasn't actually ended just yet. Which means that you are at the mercy of any of the other bad things that could happen outside of the lighthouse. Something which may lead to frustrating game overs where you're right on the cusp of success and then finally get sent to a mental ward for acting like a psychotic conspiracy theorist around town. Yeah, I mean, I could kind of see that one coming. But once you do finally reach the top of the lighthouse and vanquish the Ogre from existence, there's a very satisfying feeling of success. I would strongly recommend you give this game a shot yourself if you're into cosmic horror, roguelikes, or RPGs. Preferably all three at the same time, actually. For a game that is very blatantly inspired, if not almost based on Uzumaki by Junjis, what with the whole idea of multiple mysteries that eventually converge into each other, World of Horror has its own very distinct style and flair. For what it is, it does a very good job, and I can't wait to see this game inevitably be updated more and more, because it's just come out, essentially. It's only in version 1.0, after what feels like a fucking lifetime of being in early access. So, yeah, game good. This is my game. It was made for me.